20 Depression-era wilderness hacks the outdoor industry hopes you never discover. Here's what I'm going to tell you in the next few minutes, and frankly, I need you to stay through the entire video because the real reason these techniques vanished isn't what you think. By the end of this, you'll understand something that explains why a $70 water filter exists when a Depression-era family could purify water for essentially nothing. It's not accidental, it's deliberate, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. If you've never watched this channel before, subscribe right now, because the wilderness skills we talk about here contradict everything the outdoor industry sells you. And I want to know in the comments something personal. What's one survival trick your grandparent or great-grandparent taught you that actually worked? Share it. I read these. Wait, this part is important, and I need your full attention for a second. Everything we're about to cover comes with deep dive explanations, forgotten techniques, and the actual mechanics of why these hacks worked so much better than modern replacements. All of that is available in our complete wilderness survival guide in the description and pinned comment below. It's where we break down the science behind these methods. The guide is a paid resource, but it covers what a lifetime of outdoor living taught your ancestors, and what the industry doesn't want you learning for free. Let's start with something almost nobody talks about anymore. In 1933, people didn't hike into the wilderness with a pre-planned route and a satellite communicator. They went into the woods to live there. The hacks we're counting down aren't tips or tricks. They're the difference between eating and starving, between infection and survival, between your family staying intact or scattering. Number 20. The dual-purpose snare trap. Modern hunting equipment runs into the hundreds of dollars. A compound bow, a rifle, ammunition, licenses. A Depression-era snare was made from wire scraps, saplings you cut on the spot, and maybe an hour of your afternoon. You set it once and walked away. If you caught nothing, you lost nothing but time. If you caught something, you had food for 2 days. But here's what the hunting industry never advertises. Those snares worked consistently, year after year, because they were designed around animal behavior, not profit margins. A wire loop costs pennies. Ammunition costs real money. Guess which one the manufacturers wanted you dependent on? Number 19. Water storage using natural cooling. Before modern refrigeration equipment, families stored water and kept it cool, using nothing but geography and a buried vessel. A clay pot buried 2 feet deep stays within 15 degrees of ground temperature year-round. In warm weather, that meant water cold enough to be refreshing. In winter, that same depth meant it didn't freeze. A pottery supplier in 1930 sold a large clay pot for about 30 cents. The equivalent cooler today runs $75 and requires ice that someone has to make or buy continuously. Your great-grandmother's buried pot worked for 50 years without electricity. Number 18. Salt-preserved game meat. The outdoor industry now sells vacuum-sealed freezer bags and dehydrators. Prices run anywhere from $40 to $300 depending on the model. In the Depression, salt was inexpensive. A pound of salt cost about a penny. You mixed salt with game meat, packed it tight in a barrel, and it stayed edible for months. The salt drew out moisture, created an environment where bacteria couldn't survive, and actually improved the flavor as time passed. Decades later, food scientists studied this process and discovered the chemistry was so reliable it's still used in commercial operations. They just charge you more and call it artisanal. Number 17. Bark stripping for emergency materials. When families needed cordage, rope basically, they didn't buy it. They walked to a birch or ash tree, stripped long sections of bark while the tree was still living, and dried it. The dried bark became incredibly flexible. You could weave it, braid it, or soak it, and bending it around saplings to form containers. One tree gave you material for dozens of projects. The tree usually survived. Now we're told that rope costs $8 a coil. Cordage and emergency kits cost $30 for 100 feet. A single walk to the woods provided more material than most people ever need. Number 16. Cattail harvesting. Every marsh held cattails, and families treated them like a grocery store. The roots, called rhizomes, could be dug, cleaned, dried, and ground into flour. The young shoots were edible raw. The pollen was protein-rich. 1 acre of marshland could feed a family for weeks. We've spent the last 80 years draining wetlands for development and treating them as wastelands. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical companies sell fiber supplements for $15 a bottle. The cattail root contains exactly the same soluble fiber, completely free, if you know where to find it and how to process it. This is where the pattern becomes clear, and it's worth stopping for a moment to understand what's happening. Every single hack we're discussing worked not because Depression families were creative or clever. They worked because the families had no alternative. They couldn't call for delivery. They couldn't run to a store. They solved problems with what existed around them. And once they solved those problems, industries rose up to make sure those solutions stayed forgotten. Number 15. Bone broth from game processing. Every animal killed meant bones left over. Families boiled those bones for days with water and any available herbs or plants. The result was gelatin-rich broth that could be cooled into blocks and stored for months. When times got thin and there was nothing else to eat, bone broth meant your family got minerals, joint support, and calories with almost no waste. A box of bone broth supplements now costs $40. A deer skeleton, some water, and fire cost nothing. The result is chemically identical. Different price tag, identical nutrition. Number 14. Rendered animal fat for waterproofing. Hunters and trappers treated leather and fabric with rendered fat from their kills. It repelled water better than anything money could buy. A coat or pair of boots treated this way lasted through brutal winters. Modern waterproof sprays cost $30 a bottle and need reapplication every few months. A single animal provided enough fat to treat an entire winter's gear for a family of 5, and it lasted years. The coating actually improved with use. Outdoor gear companies built empires on selling you what was once free waste product. Number 13. Ash from the fire for lye production. This one changed everything. Depression families kept their fireplace or stove ash in a barrel with water. The chemical reaction created lye, which they used for soap, for cleaning, for tanning hides, for dozens of applications. The ash came free. The water came free. No alkaline chemicals to buy. No industrial process required. You boiled wood and water and got a substance that now sells in specialty shops for soap making at premium prices. Some families made enough lye to trade with neighbors. It was currency. Before we continue with the rest of this list, keep this in mind for a second. The patterns you are starting to see here are not random. There is a system underneath all of this. If you want to truly understand why the outdoor industry works so hard to keep these methods buried, and how to apply them in your own survival situation, the complete guide to forgotten wilderness economics is waiting in the description and pinned in the comments below. This is not a surface-level list. The guide goes into the actual mechanisms of industrial erasure, the specific pressure campaigns, and the step-by-step applications you can test yourself. It is the deeper version of what we are discussing here. Number 12. Medicinal herb drying and storage. Families who lived near forests or kept gardens dried their own medicines. Willow bark for pain, plantain for wounds, elderflower for fever, ginger root for nausea. They dried these herbs in bundles, stored them in cloth bags, and had a full pharmacy that cost nothing. A single bottle of willow bark extract now retails for $18. The dried bark itself, harvested and prepared traditionally, provides identical compounds and costs you labor only. Modern pharmaceutical companies patented chemical isolates of these plants, then spent decades convincing everyone that the whole plant version was unreliable or dangerous. It was neither. It was competition. Number 11. Water storage in clay vessels. Clay pots kept water cool through evaporative cooling and slightly alkaline, reducing bacterial growth. No plastic, no chemicals, no electricity. A family's drinking water stayed safe for weeks in a clay vessel in the shade. Families made their own or traded for them locally. Today, water filtration systems cost hundreds of dollars. The ancient method still works identically. It requires nothing but clay that is shaped and fired. Any village with basic pottery knowledge could produce these indefinitely. We forgot this because plastic was cheaper to mass produce. Number 10. Preserving meat with salt, smoke, and cellar storage. Before refrigeration, families cured and smoked meat and stored it in root cellars. The combination of salt, smoke, and cold kept meat safe for months. A single animal killed in autumn could feed a family through spring. Jerky made from venison or elk lasted even longer. Smoking houses were designed specifically for this. Salt was mined or traded for, but the process was cost-free after that initial purchase. A package of smoked salmon now costs $25 for a few ounces. A family smoking their own meat for the season fed themselves for less than the cost of one restaurant meal. Number 9. Rendering animal fat for cooking and preservation. Every part of a butchered animal had value. The fat rendered down into lard, which outlasted any modern cooking oil on a shelf. Lard kept meat from spoiling. It waterproofed leather. It fueled lamps. A single pig or cow provided enough rendered fat to sustain a household for months. Modern food companies spent decades convincing us that animal fat was our enemy, launching campaigns that made lard seem medieval and dangerous. The irony is that rendered fat from a grass-fed animal contains more nutrients than the seed oils we replaced it with. A jar of rendered lard from a homestead cost nothing. The commercial equivalent costs $12 now. Number 8. Making vinegar from fruit scraps and water. Apples, berries, whey, even vegetable trimmings could be fermented into vinegar. The process required nothing but a covered jar, time, and the understanding that controlled fermentation was not something to fear. Vinegar preserved food, cleaned wounds, eased fevers, and flavored meals. A family that made vinegar never bought a bottle. The microbial cultures that produced vinegar also improved digestion and boosted immunity. We rebranded this knowledge as probiotics, and now charge $8 for a glass of kombucha. Depression-era children drank vinegar water during hot summers. Their mothers understood fermentation centuries before food science gave it a respectable name. Number 7. Building root cellars and storage structures. A hole dug into the ground, insulated with straw and stone, kept vegetables alive through winter. Potatoes lasted from October through May. Apples stored in sand stayed fresh until spring. Carrots, turnips, and beets buried in layers remained edible. The structure required labor once. After that, a family never bought winter vegetables. Modern cold storage facilities that keep produce alive cost millions. A Depression-era family built theirs with materials from their own property. Before we continue, keep this in mind for a second. The real power of these wilderness hacks is not that they save money. That is the obvious benefit. What matters more is understanding the mechanisms. The reason salt preserves meat, how fermentation creates shelf-stable food, why certain storage methods work better than others. These are not just tricks, they are the foundational principles that modern food science is still built on. If you want to master this knowledge and adapt these methods to your own situation, whether you are in the mountains or on farmland, our complete guide on wilderness preservation techniques is waiting for you in the description and pinned right at the top of the comments. This guide breaks down not just what works, but why it works, and how to troubleshoot when things go wrong. It is a paid resource that transforms these hacks into a real system you can actually use. Number 6. Foraging for seasonal plants and knowing which ones fed you. Families did not need to hunt to survive. They needed to read the land. Spring brought ramps and wild onions. Summer offered berries and edible greens. Fall provided nuts and mushrooms. Winter stored nothing, but families had preserved enough to carry through. Learning to identify plants that fed you took time, but the knowledge transferred from generation to generation. A child raised in the forest knew which mushrooms were safe, the same way a child in the city knew which store signs to read. Number 5. Making soap from rendered fat and lye. After rendering the fat, families combined it with lye extracted from wood ash. The chemical reaction produced soap. One batch cleaned a family for months. Buying soap was a luxury, making it was survival. The process required knowledge, but not money. Industrial soap manufacturers did not need you to know this. They needed you to believe soap required factories. Number 4. Harvesting rainwater and understanding water sources. Not all water came from wells. Gutters directed rainfall into barrels. Springs were mapped and relied upon. Cisterns were built to hold winter runoff. A family that understood water did not suffer during drought. Modern municipalities charge for water. During the Depression, water was something you learned to locate and preserve. The knowledge required to live in the wilderness was not theoretical. It was learned by doing. Children watched parents. Parents learned from their parents. The transfer broke when we moved to cities. When we decided that convenience mattered more than skill. When we trusted industries to handle what our grandparents handled themselves. Number 3. Making soap from wood ash and animal fat. Every cabin had a barrel of accumulated ash from the wood stove. Once a year, water was poured through that ash to create lye, a caustic solution that could break down grease. That lye was mixed with rendered fat, left to cure for weeks, and you had soap. No factories. No chemicals with names that required a chemistry degree to pronounce. Just ash, fat, and patience. A bar of soap in 1933 cost money most families did not have. Making your own cost nothing but time. The soap was harder on skin than modern varieties, true enough, but it cleaned. It disinfected. It lasted longer because people did not waste it like we do now. The outdoor industry now sells artisanal soap bars for $18 each, marketing them as eco-friendly. What they are is capitalism rediscovering grandmother's method and charging premium prices for it. The formula has not changed. The story has. Instead of necessity, it is now called sustainability. Instead of survival, it is called wellness. Number 2. Identifying edible mushrooms and fungi. Before field guides were printed for mass consumption, people learned which mushrooms could be eaten through observation and inherited knowledge. Morels appeared in spring near dead ash trees. Puffballs could be sliced and cooked like cutlets. Certain shelf fungi could be dried and brewed as medicine. A person with proper training could walk into any forest and find food that no seed had to be planted to grow. The risk was real. Misidentify one species and you could become very ill. This is why knowledge mattered. This is why it was passed down with care. A child did not simply guess. A child learned to look at the underside of the cap, to smell it, to note where it grew and what time of year, to watch an experienced forager make the determination first. Today, foraging has become a trendy hobby for weekend hikers. Books are published. Classes are offered. People pay instructors to teach what was once common knowledge. There is nothing wrong with learning now, instead of never learning at all. But understand that this knowledge did not originate in a university program or a best-selling book. It came from forests, from people who had to eat, from generations who paid attention. Before we continue, I need you to think about something for a moment. Everything I have covered up until now, the food preservation, the water sourcing, the soap, the mushroom identification, these are not isolated tricks. They are parts of a system, a complete survival framework that operated because people understood how their environment worked. They did not see nature as a recreation destination or a place to visit on weekends. They lived inside it. They read it like we read instructions on a screen. That is exactly where the complete guide on this topic becomes invaluable. In the description and pinned comment, you will find the ebook that maps out the foundational principles behind all 20 of these hacks. It is not a surface-level overview. It covers the mechanisms, the historical context, and the practical steps to begin applying each method in your own wilderness setting. This is the resource that ties everything together. You can grab it and explore the deeper strategies that the outdoor industry definitely does not want widely understood. Number 1. Understanding seasonal patterns and animal behavior. Wilderness survival at its core is about reading signs. When deer move upslope in autumn, winter is coming early. When certain birds disappear, water will freeze sooner than usual. When insects behave differently, weather patterns are shifting. Depression-era people were not meteorologists. They were observers. They noticed. They remembered. They adjusted. A family's survival depended on their ability to predict what was coming based on what they saw. Storing food was not random. It was timed to when certain crops would finish. Hunting expeditions were scheduled based on animal migration patterns that had been consistent for generations. Wood was cut for winter before the first freeze made the work nearly impossible. This is the frame that held everything together. Without understanding seasonal cycles and animal behavior, all the other skills were just techniques. With it, they became a way of living. A person who understood when to harvest, when to preserve, when to hunt, and when to prepare was someone who survived. Someone who did not got unlucky, or desperate, or both. Now let me tell you what I promised at the beginning. The real secret behind these 20 hacks was not the individual techniques themselves. It was this. The families who survived the Depression and thrived in the wilderness understood something that modern survival culture has almost completely abandoned. They understood that survival is not about having the right gear or knowing the most tricks. Survival is about seeing the land as a conversation partner, not a resource to extract from. Every hack on this list worked because it was built on direct observation. The bacon grease jar only made sense if you understood that nothing gets wasted. The seasonal calendar only worked if you paid attention to what actually happened, year after year, in your specific location. The medicinal plants only healed because someone had watched them work for decades and trusted that knowledge. The outdoor industry has spent the last 70 years teaching us to ignore all of that. They sell us products because products are profitable. Knowledge passed from grandmother to grandchild is free. It cannot be monetized, so it was systematically erased from our culture. What these 20 hacks reveal is not a list of forgotten tricks. They reveal a completely different way of thinking about survival itself. A way where you are not fighting the wilderness. You are reading it. You are cooperating with it. You are becoming part of its rhythms instead of trying to dominate them. When your great-grandmother knew exactly when to plant by watching the oak leaves, she was not guessing. She was reading a system that had worked for thousands of years. When she preserved food according to the lunar calendar, she was not being superstitious. She was working with natural cycles that science has only recently started to understand. When she used specific plants for specific ailments, she was not practicing folk medicine. She was using a pharmacy that had been tested by millions of people across centuries. The outdoor industry did not want you to know this because it threatens their entire business model. If you understand that survival can be learned from your environment and your community and your family history, you do not need their courses. You do not need their expensive equipment. You do not need their subscriptions and memberships and certified credentials. You need something much simpler: attention, patience, a willingness to learn from people who actually live this way. Here is your challenge for this week. Find one person in your family or community who grew up in a rural or wilderness setting. Someone who actually worked the land, or hunted, or preserved food. Ask them one question. Just one. Ask them what they wish younger people knew about surviving outdoors. Then actually listen to the answer. Do not interrupt it with your phone or your plans or your doubt. Let them finish. That single conversation will teach you more than most survival courses ever could, because it comes from someone who has actually had to make these decisions, who has real stakes in getting them right, who remembers what happens when you do not pay attention to the seasons, when you do not watch the animals, when you ignore what your grandmother told you. The 20 hacks were never really about bacon grease or flour sacks or dandelion greens. They were about something far deeper. They were proof that humans can live in partnership with their environment instead of at war with it. That survival is not an emergency skill you learn right before you need it. It is a way of paying attention that runs through every single day of your life. The outdoor industry will keep selling you their solutions, but the real solution has been available to you the entire time. It lives in the knowledge of people around you, in the patterns of the land where you actually live, in the cycles that have been running since long before we were born, and will keep running long after we are gone. Thanks so much for watching this all the way through. If you found something useful here, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss what we put out next. Leave a comment down below telling me one hack from this list you actually want to try, or one person in your life who taught you something about living outdoors. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to hear your story.